But political analyst and journalist Lucas Koerner has kept an ear to the ground from Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, and he joins us now via Skype. A very good evening to you, Lucas. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, talk to us about reports that President Maduro is prepared to meet the opposition.
This is not new. Maduro has repeated on numerous occasions his willingness to sit down with the opposition, and there have been rounds of dialogue over the past few years. The issue is that the opposition is itself divided between a more moderate faction and a more radical faction, which is close to Marco Rubio, the senator from Florida, that wants to push a much more violent, radical regime change agenda rather than a negotiated transition settlement within the existing institutional settlement. So it's really a battle within the opposition to see who will win out. And right now, it's clearly the radicals that backed by the Trump administration that are holding the day today.
Lucas, do we know exactly what the mood is like on the ground following calls for fresh protests?
In fact, I just returned from the protest today in the east of Caracas, and they were actually very small, scattered protests within the east of the upper middle class east of the city. I would estimate around 5,000 people scattered throughout. We also went to the barrio of Pecare, which is to the even farther east, and in fact, there was no protest there at all. So this seems to be, as has been the pattern over the past few years, a largely upper middle class phenomenon without mass support with regard to today.
And the likelihood of a military crackdown in the freshly called street protests?
Well, I mean, again, the protest already happened. There was no police to be seen. People were out on the streets, chanting and with signs. There was no crackdown whatsoever. There's a larger march scheduled for Saturday, but again, I anticipate there will be a similar rally within the east of the city, and probably will not attempt to march to the west because that often leads to clashes with government supporters and also authorities.
Now, the United States and other world powers, particularly the European Union, have joined a chorus of those calling for Maduro to step aside. So why would world powers want to question the sovereignty of other independent states?
Well, I think that it's very important to recognize the United States has continually attempted to oust the Chavista government in Venezuela. Recall in April 11, 2002, the United States supported a coup, and in fact, Elliot Abrams, who's the new envoy to Venezuela, reportedly gave a nod to that coup, and that temporarily ousted Chavez. And during that time, the dictatorial regime dissolved the constitution and attempted to dissolve all branches of the government. And now the same opposition claims to be acting in the name of the constitution, but many of the same people who are remain part of the opposition today are now, acting in the name of the Constitution. So it's a very paradoxical situation. But on a larger geopolitical level, it's important to recognize that the United States has long considered Latin America its own, backyard, so to speak, and it has never accepted the geopolitical challenge that Chavez represented, i.e., trying to create alternative bodies like the CELAC, the UNASUR, the Petrocaribe, alternative political and economic regional integration bodies that effectively leave the United States out of the equation. And for this reason, the United States supported a coup in Honduras in 2009, a parliamentary coup in Paraguay in 2011. Just recently in 2016, Dilma Rousseff was ousted in a completely baseless impeachment proceeding, and the frontrunner Lula was banned from running last year. So, I mean, the United States seeks to oust the regimes that, these leftist and center-leftist government that don't follow its orders, and that has always been the case.
Here we are, Lucas. We have a democratically elected president being coerced to step down and to give way for an opposition leader. I mean, this bears the hallmarks of a coup. Is this not a coup?
This is absolutely a coup in the sense that in the moment that this little-known opposition leader who was not elected, he received 97,000 votes in 2015, but he never won a democratic election as president. He was effectively appointed by Donald Trump. Donald Trump was the first to recognize him as president. Donald Trump, who has also not won a majority of popular votes in the election. So this is clearly, but I think it's important for your viewers to understand that this coup is not going according to plan. The United States anticipated that after this self-swearing in took place, the military would fissure, and part of it would back Guaido, and you would see a popular uprising. None of that has occurred. Instead, the U.S. has been forced to implement an oil embargo on Monday, which is going to devastate the Venezuelan economy, and now there's talk about the U.S. arming dissident Venezuelan military officers outside of Venezuela, which sounds a lot like the U.S. the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba, or the United States arming the Contra mercenaries in Nicaragua. This is a very worrying development.
Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the British leader of, the Labour leader of Britain, sees the events in Venezuela through the prism of a Cold War ideology. He says it's a worldview that celebrates the Maduro regime as an anti-imperialist resistor of U.S. hegemony, no matter its record of gross corruption and abuse. Do you subscribe to this school of thought?
I think that, as I said before, the Maduro government has been viewed as an obstacle by Washington. The United States is not concerned with the corruption or the democracy of human rights. It's concerned with the fact that Caracas, under Maduro and Chavez, has sought to diversify Venezuelan exports, has given contracts to Russian and Chinese companies. It has sought to, for a South-South kind of integration, looking to, strengthen the hand of the players like Iran and China, Russia, and also South Africa, the BRICS. And the United States wants to return things to the way they were in pre-1998, pre-Chavez, when U.S. oil companies had, and as John Bolton just said on Thursday, he was speaking with oil companies, but it's in the interest of the United States to open up Venezuela's oil sector to U.S. Petroleum corporations like Chevron and ExxonMobil. So I think that there clearly is a U.S. geopolitical interest in toppling this government and installing, in fact, this new the National Assembly President, Juan Guaido, who has sworn himself in as interim president, they're drafting a law currently to privatize part of the oil sector. There clearly is an aim to return things the way they were before Chavez came to power.
No doubt. You mentioned some of the superpowers, China, Russia, Turkey, Cuba. Especially with the case of China, they don't want to see, the democratic uprising succeed. And in the case of China and Russia, they don't want to lose the billions that Venezuela owes them.
Yeah, absolutely. Russia and China, I think that they're kind of sticking to the sidelines at this point. Certainly, yes, they have taken Russia particularly, has taken a very vocal position in denouncing this illegal, U.S.-backed coup that's taking place, and also this illegal oil embargo. But they're not really taking. Russia just announced they're expecting $100 million in payment as part of debt that's owed to them. China is not coming forward with new financial support. So yes, there's a lot of words coming from Russia and China, but it's not a lot of material support. I think that they're sticking to the sidelines to see how this is going to play out.
What exactly informs Latin American countries that support this apparent coup when democratic processes have not been followed?
Well, this is the interesting thing we should look at, because in many of these countries in the so-called Lima Group, which was formed after the Organization of American States could not reach a consensus regarding applying the democratic charter to expel Venezuela, in many of these countries like Honduras, where the United States basically supported an electoral fraud that was acknowledged by the OAS to be fraudulent in 2007 when Orlando Hernandez was elected. You have Guatemala, which is, the Morales regime is extremely corrupt and has no legitimacy. In Brazil, you have a neo-fascist in Jair Bolsonaro, who has literally, as I mentioned, won after the front runner, Lula da Silva, who would have won, was jailed for unspecified offenses and barred from running. So, the question is, why are we talking about Venezuela? Why are we talking about trying to return democracy to Venezuela when there's so many other regimes just in this region, just next door, Colombia, Brazil, Honduras, or let alone Egypt or Saudi Arabia, where you really have dictatorships or regimes with very dubious democratic legitimacy?
The Venezuelans themselves believe that change cannot come any sooner, but they are of the view that they don't want to see the kind of change that they want being delivered by the United States. Does it matter who delivers the kind of change that Venezuelans need?
Well, Venezuelans have a long memory, especially those of middle-aged Venezuelans, people in their 30s and 40s. They remember how things were before Chavismo came to power, and they recognize that the United States backed this extremely corrupt oligarchic government that basically sold off large parts of the economy to transnational interests, and poverty was 60% in 1998. So this is clearly the backdrop of, for many people that absolutely, according to the opposition-aligned data analysis pollster in October, the Maduro government not only has around 80% unpopularity, without a doubt, but the opposition, the National Assembly, of which Juan Guaido is currently the president, has a 70% disapproval rating. So we have to recognize that this is the same opposition that has largely has a kind of upper-class white character, very racially white, and it doesn't go to the barrios where mostly the black and brown working class majority lives, and it wants to dictate the terms of a transition, and it really doesn't have the. I think many Venezuelans, especially the poor, understand that this opposition is not one that has their interests in mind, and all you have to do is look at the actions that they're taking.
Just a quick one, Lucas. We don't have much time, unfortunately. Is Venezuela's economic crisis socialism in disarray or something else of the making of Maduro himself?
It's a complex reality. I mean, one cannot deny the economic mismanagement on the part of the Maduro administration, the failure to implement currency exchange reform that really could have, in 2014, have made a difference, or restructure the debt, which would have also changed the situation as it currently is. However, at the same time, the collapse of Venezuelan oil production, particularly in the 12 months following the imposition of U.S. financial sanctions, the loss of 1 billion barrels a day of production, that should be laid at the door of Washington. This is clearly, and the economist Francisco Rodriguez, who is the foremost expert on the Venezuelan economy today, he has acknowledged himself, wrote a paper, and he has called this new round of sanctions, it's an embargo. It's going to devastate Venezuela's economy, and it's criminal it's illegal under international law. It's going to kill many, many Venezuelans, because when you destroy the economy of a country, you prevent people from getting the kinds of food and medicines that they need. And so the United States right now is owning the crisis in Venezuela with these sanctions, and it will need to take responsibility for the dire humanitarian consequences.
All right, Lucas, thank you so much for your input. We appreciate it. That was political analyst and journalist Lucas Koerner, and he's been keeping an eye on the ground, and he was chatting to us live on the line.